So, is discipleship for me? This is a question that I think we all have to ask ourselves, and there are a number of answers that people have tried to give to this question over time. Sometimes people don't want to be involved in the discipleship process, and so we look for a way out of that. They go to the Great Commission, which talks about going and making disciples, and I've heard people say, well, that was for them and not for us. That was a direct instruction for the 11 apostles, and that instruction was for their time, for them, not for us. But we also clue into the Great Commission to talk about baptism. We take that as an essential, but we don't take the disciple making part as an essential. And in fact, what we boiled it down to is go and convert people, go and change their minds, go and get them to buy into a particular brand of doctrine, the Church of Christ doctrine. And so what we've missed is that what Jesus actually says is he doesn't just say go convert people. He doesn't just say go baptize people. He says go and make disciples, Christ followers. How do you make disciples? This is what Jesus defines in the rest of the verse. He says, therefore go and make disciples. This is Matthew 28, 19 and 20. Therefore go and make disciples, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them everything that I have commanded you. What did Jesus tell them to do? He told the disciples to make disciples. How do you make a disciple? By baptizing them and teaching them. Somehow out of this whole verse we have formed a proof text for baptism by going to the Great Commission and saying, this is what we're supposed to be doing. Jesus told us to go and baptize people. What Jesus actually told them to do, us to do, was to go and make Christ followers. And the process by which we do, how we do that, is baptizing people and teaching them the instructions of Jesus. In effect, what we've done is we've converted people through teaching them through the letters of Paul, not through the teachings of Jesus. This is actually a little bit backwards. When we get into the New Testament and what they were teaching, they were proclaiming the good news of the kingdom. This is the same thing Jesus was proclaiming through his ministry and demonstrating through his miracles. So somehow, one of the answers to this question of should we be making disciples, people will say this is just for them. Why would we say this is just for them when we're pulling out the essentiality of baptism from the Great Commission? I think it's a grand excuse to get out of the disciple-making process because we've gotten so good, or at least we're so good, at making converts. So what does God really want us to do? And is this message not just for them, but also for us? If the message was just for them, then I have a really hard time saying this, that the baptism part is as applicable as we make it. But what I believe is the instruction was for all time, because what does Jesus instruct them to do? Again, he teaches his apostles, he instructs them to go and make disciples, to do that by baptizing people, which is immersion, and to instruct them to teach them everything Jesus commanded. What did Jesus command? To make disciples. What are the disciples supposed to do? Make disciples who know what Jesus instructed. So when you make a disciple who knows what Jesus instructed, you're making a disciple who's been instructed to make disciples. This is a multi-generational instruction. This is not just for them, this is for us. And this is exactly why churches are in decline, because we have given up our God-given vocation. We've set it on the shelf. We have substituted it with trying to convert people without discipling them, which is a convincing them of certain truths and getting them to intellectually agree or assent to a certain set of propositions, a certain way of reading the Bible. And we have gotten out of the disciple-making process. We have gotten out of training people how to do the Jesus life together. When you think about, we study with someone, we convince them that Jesus is the Lord, is Christ, they confess their sins, they go and are baptized, and then we drop them off. We were not in a discipling process, we were in a converting process. When we evangelize people, we are not necessarily discipling people. But when we disciple people, we are always evangelizing people if they don't know Jesus yet. And so we have to start wrapping our minds around this idea that we are here to make Christ followers, that is, disciples, a follower, a learner, a student, an apprentice. And that person should then be equipped, should be trained to go and make more disciples. This is something that we've really missed out on. It's something we've put on the shelf. It's something that we've neglected. And what we've exchanged it for are endless discussions and arguments on how we do church and who's doing church right and how you worship on Sunday. And we have not done an adequate job of teaching people how to follow Jesus and being in these conversations regularly together through prayer and study, listening to Jesus in the Gospels, doing the Great Commission, which is learning the instructions of Jesus. Those who are baptized should be learning the instructions of Jesus together and teaching those things to other people. This is Discipleship 101. We have neglected that, and guess what? We're in decline. We've been in decline for decades. We will continue to be in decline if we don't change our culture. We will continue to be in decline if we don't change our values. This is not just changing how we do things, this is changing why we do things. We're not just making converts and we're not just evangelizing. We are showing people, demonstrating, teaching, instructing people, walking with people in how to do the Jesus life together. That is discipleship. And when our churches begin to embrace this, I believe we will experience a new season of growth, not only numerically, if the Lord wills that, but also the spiritual depth of the people who are attending our churches, because we are converting them from a paradigm of consumerism, where you come and consume a religious product on Sunday, and if it's not to your liking, you complain and complain and complain about it. Not just a consumer. We want to convert people from consumers to producers, people who are actively involved and engaged in kingdom work. This is us reclaiming the idea of the priesthood of all believers. When I grew up, the idea of the priesthood of all believers was kind of an anti-Catholic teaching, going to 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 9, that you were a royal priesthood, that Peter instructed that all Christians were royal priests. That's absolutely biblical, but we have neglected that teaching. We kind of used it as a gotcha verse for certain groups who have priests, but what we didn't do was take that doctrine, that teaching, and seriously apply it ourselves. We created still a clergy laity break where the preacher, the elders, the ministers do the work of the church, do the ministry of the church. The congregation sits and consumes and absorbs and listens. What do we even call that room? We avoid sanctuary. We avoid worship center. We call it the auditorium, the listening room. And so we create a culture, a system of 90-something% of people sitting and listening and consuming, and a very tiny percentage of people who are giving and producing. We have to flip that narrative. We have to flip that script, and we have to get our people active and involved. Do this for me. Go to your church involvement form. If you have a church involvement form, and look and see what activities are on that form, what things are being emphasized, what message is being communicated through that list of things that when someone say they place membership and we give them an involvement form, we say, please fill this out. Lead opening prayer, lead closing prayer, do the Lord's Supper, pass communion, these sorts of things. Is disciple making anywhere in that mix? How do we get people to think that what we're asking them to be involved in and engaged in goes outside of 1 hour on Sunday? Teaching Bible class, greeting, these kinds of things. Our involvement, we have to change our paradigm of what it means to be involved and think about what we're asking people to do, because what we're doing is we're creating a system and a culture of consumerism, not participation, not a priesthood of all believers. Man, when we embrace this and we shift that paradigm, when we flip that script, there's going to be growth that's going to happen, at least the maturing of our people. And when our people mature, and when they take discipleship seriously, because our church leadership is taking discipleship seriously, not just teaching it, but our church leaders engaging in making and developing disciples, our churches will be healthy. Our churches will learn to take petty arguments and put them to the side because we're so busy engaging ourselves in the proclamation of the good news of the kingdom and being out helping people, serving people, loving people, just like Jesus did. And so this is a great challenge, but if our churches can embrace this, I'm convinced there are amazing, amazing days ahead. So please consider this. Please pray over this, and thank you for listening. Appreciate you.